What is the cross we're called to pick up today? What do we have to lose? And what do we have to gain? Please pray again with me. And now, O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of each heart gathered together in your presence on this morning be acceptable in your sight, for you are indeed our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I feel sorry for Peter. He's just gotten a really, really hard question right. And all of a sudden, seemingly from out of nowhere, Jesus is rebuking him. Who do you say that I am? Jesus has just asked the disciples. And when I picture the scene, I picture Jesus, the teacher, talking to his class of disciples, and they aren't quite sure what the answer is, so they're averting their eyes, hoping the teacher will not call on them. And then there's Peter, there in the back row. Ooh, ooh, ooh! Peter, Jesus says, you are the Messiah, Peter answers. And Jesus seems to think that is a good answer. Have you ever given the right answer to a really, really hard question that no one else knew the answer to? It's a real rush, isn't it? Maybe you were sitting in front of Jeopardy with some of your smart friends. You should always watch television Jeopardy with your dumb friends when you're watching Jeopardy, but somehow I'm always there with the smartest people. And then there's always like some weird cousin or something who hardly ever speaks, who knows the answers to the strangest categories, and you're not quite sure how. Just imagine yourself in that room when all of a sudden you know the answer that they don't know. That would be, Alex, what is underneath the tender leaves of the jujube tree? You say, peering over your glasses, looking smart, whether they're real or imagined. I'll take hiding places of colorful flying insects for 1,000, Alex. There's that feeling of smartness, of being on top of it all for a change, of being maybe even the feeling of I'm turning a corner, entering into something new. Finally, this is where I begin. We have an internal sense, I think, that understanding something gives us a place. It gives us a kind of security. I have a relative, a small child, who finds security in numbers. He's under 3 years old, and when he gets anxious, he counts by twos. He counts indefinitely up by twos. And one time, just to kind of play with him, this was ill-advised, by the way, I decided to skip a number. So I'm chanting these numbers with him to calm him down, and I 40, 40, 42, 44, 48. And he panicked, and he said, 46, 46, 46, 46. He was genuinely concerned that I had messed up something that he thought he understood. I had taken away his place of security. I think I'm a lot like this child, actually, even if it's not in relation to counting that I find my security. I get into kind of the rhythm of the answers that I give. I'm a teacher, and people ask me questions, and sometimes I think, okay, I know the answer to that one. Hit the button here. That's why the Trinity matters. I teach doctrine. Hit the button here. That's what's up with the cross. Hit the button here. That's why God allows suffering. But it can be kind of destabilizing for me when I'm really listening to what it is that my students, my colleagues in churches are saying, and I realize, wait a second, they're asking me about something I've never thought of before, or maybe even they're saying something about some question I raised that's a pretty good answer, and it changes some other answer that I realize, wait a second, they know something I don't know about that. 46, 46, 46. Do we hold on, or do we allow that space to be opened up? Peter, he's pretty sure about his answer. He's feeling pretty good. He's feeling pretty secure. He's got to be feeling pretty secure because he has the audacity to rebuke Jesus when Jesus starts talking about the sufferings that he's about to endure. You can almost see Peter again. Jesus, get over here. I got to talk to you. Remember that answer I gave? That was the right answer, Messiah. Remember? Messiah. Let's review. Messiah. Messiah. Well, Messiahs, they don't get arrested by authorities. They don't go to the cross and die. Messiahs rule. They don't wind up being executed as criminals. You see Peter's ready to say on Jeopardy, I'll take the prestige of being Messiah for 1,000, Alex. But then he falls on his face. He honestly thinks that what it means to say Jesus is the Messiah means that Jesus is going to be able to finesse things and avoid the cross. See, Peter, as it turns out, has the right answer, but has absolutely no idea what it is he's talking about. He doesn't know what Messiah really means. Oh no, Peter, Alex Trebek answers him back. The answer we're looking for is, what is the Messiah empties himself of all prestige? Jesus' words no doubt shook Peter up. To think that the one he has just identified as Messiah is going to be prosecuted by the authorities and crucified as a criminal. What kind of sense does this even make? I mean, sure, Peter is making up his own definition of what it means to be Messiah, but I like his definition better than Jesus' definition. It's not only more comfortable, it's more effective, it's neater, it's cleaner, it shows more sort of leadership qualities in Jesus than this whole cross thing does. I mean, and as an added bonus, Peter and the other disciples, which may even include us, Peter doesn't have to die with Jesus if being just Messiah means that the cross is avoided altogether. Peter's worried about that too, I think. He's worried about losing his life. It's no accident that then Jesus gives a little speech to the disciples about losing life. This is just what's at stake for Peter. Not only Jesus' life, but also his own. And this stuff is really tricky stuff. Cross stuff is tricky. Invite me back during Advent. Advent stuff can be tricky too. But this text in our lectionary today, the second week in Lent, losing your life? How could that be a good thing? The more I read this text, the more I'm with Peter. I'm fighting against it. I want to rebuke Jesus even for saying such things. And I know how the story ends. Peter didn't know that. Loss of life isn't what Jesus is supposed to be about. Denying ourselves? I mean, come on, where's the Jesus of John chapter 10? The Jesus who said, I've come to bring you life, that you might have it more abundantly. That's what Jesus should be about, abundant life, not giving up life. And then there's the issue of every time we look at our iPhones and we see the news streams coming in, right? We see a lot about loss of life, always. But it always seems this way, especially the last couple weeks. Violent loss of life, senseless death, loss of life. How could it possibly be good? Isn't it even dangerous to read and preach and think about what Jesus is saying, given our current historical context? Loss of life needs to be condemned. The kind of loss Jesus is calling us to, of course, though, is not the kind of loss that we are seeing on the news these days. The loss Jesus is talking about is the loss of life that I would put in quotation marks, so if you'll let me get away with this, right? I'm thinking that Jesus says that we need to lose life, lowercase letters, life, for the sake of life, capital letters. The text is confusing. If you lose your life, you find your life. If you lose your life, you find life. So now we have to figure out what's the life that we lose and what's the life that we find. What is the life that we gain? You see, I think what Jesus is telling Peter is that the kind of life he would have had if he figured out a way to appease the authorities and to avoid the crucifixion is not the life to which he is called by God the Father. The life that in turn would be the source of life for all of us. Do you ever wonder if you'd be able to make huge life sacrifices? I'm talking about huge life sacrifices. I mean, sacrifices that I've never been in a position to have to make. I mean, we read stories about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor who was involved in an attempt to assassinate Hitler, and as a result was executed by hanging during World War II. I ask myself, would I be willing to give up my life for the sake of fighting Hitler? Or we hear the story of a man named Russell Botman, who wrote the Belhar Declaration, if you've ever heard of that. It is a declaration that was made in South Africa that speaks against apartheid. And Russell Botman, because of his activities, was thrown in jail on 3 separate occasions for a year at a time. He had young children. He's thrown into jail for a year with no process, no sense that he would ever get out. At the end of each year, they just sort of came and let him out, didn't say anything to him, but he had no idea when he was in there how long he would be in there. I asked myself, would I be willing to take a stand against apartheid if it meant that I would have to be separated from my children for 3 discrete years in prison, not knowing whether I would get out? Would I be willing to make that kind of a sacrifice? I ask myself when I read the work of Karl Barth, so that's someone that I study and teach, and during World War II again, he refused to pledge allegiance to Hitler, and as a result lost his teaching position and was thrown out of Germany. Would I be willing to do what Barth did if it meant losing the teaching position that I love so dearly? I don't know. See, lots of Barth's colleagues, what they did is they pledged allegiance to Hitler, but they kept their fingers crossed. You know what I mean? Kind of kept their fingers crossed. They mumbled it a little bit, and they said, all right, we'll just say this and we'll kind of just appease the system. We'll appease the system so we can keep on teaching, so we can keep on being effective. Here at IPC last night at Lee's beautiful home, several people were telling me about some of the history of this church, and some of the stories I heard were beautiful stories about how your forebears and maybe some people who are present today actually stood up in the civil rights movement and sacrificed life, quotation marks, small letters, for the sake of life, abundant, capital letters, took risks that really had a cost. I ask myself, if I had been here with you in the 1960s, would I have been one of the people who stood up and said, I'm going to make a sacrifice? It seems to me that we cannot assume that we would automatically be on the side of the angels, because there have been plenty of believers like ourselves who haven't been. See? And I think this is a hard thing for me to say. And I'll talk to myself. I'm talking to myself here. And how do we know? And how do we get ready? How can we be ready when we're called upon to make a sacrifice for the sake of life? I teach a class every year or every couple of years, of Laotian Christians. They are people who live in California, and every year they get on this van and they stuff the van full of inexpensive food that they know where to buy it in California. They all get on this van and they drive to Austin Seminary and spend a week listening to us seminary professors teach them things. And about the 3rd time I taught them for a week, I started to feel kind of uncomfortable, because as I got to know them, what I found out is that virtually all of them had spent some time in prison for their faith. You see, in Laos, it has been illegal to be a Christian, and simply for coming to worship, simply for sharing their faith, they have paid great cost. So I've had kind of this unnerving feeling, what am I doing teaching these people? I'm not even sure I would go that far. I'd probably mumble, so I didn't have to go to jail. And here they've been in prison. How did I wind up being the teacher? You get the question, how am I teaching them? So one day I came in, did this big confession to them. I said, listen, I have a confession to make. I'm just not sure I could do what you do. More or less, I said, I think you're better Christians than I am, better disciples. You're willing to lay down your lives. And as a result, you've been clearly given life. You should see the centeredness of these people in their faith, the confidence that these brothers and sisters in Christ have. And I thought that they'd be a bit dismayed. I expected my confession to evoke a little bit of a lessening of their respect for me. And instead they just smiled at me and said, "Well, if you were there, you'd do it too." I said, "Well, why do you say that? How can you be so sure?" "I'm still not sure." "They're sure." "How can you be so sure?" And I said, "No, you respect me as a teacher." I said, but just because I can, sometimes teach pretty well, it doesn't mean that when push came to shove, I'd be able to stand up. They said, "Oh, no, you're a good teacher." They said, "But that's not why we think you would do it." I said, "Well, why are you so sure?" They said, "Because we're just like you. We didn't know we could do it either." "You're just like us, we're just like you." And they said, "And now can we stop talking about this and get on with the lesson?" And I gotta tell you that was the most moving thing for me of all, because what I realized in that moment was that these Laotian friends of mine, they weren't only following Jesus and laying down their lives in the big moments when they were threatened with prison, but they, day to day, were laying down their lives. When they packed up that van, not being able to afford enough money to fly to Austin, when they packed up those vegetables and stuff that they bring and cook for themselves, not being able to even afford our food services, when they sit in class, take time away from work to hear professors teach. I tell you that one thing that'll humble you, but it was an example to me. They're ready. These folks are ready. They are laying down their lives on a day-to-day basis. So I ask myself again and ask you, what is the cross? What is the cross that on this day we are called to bear? What do we have to lose? What do we have to gain? This passage isn't only about someday you might be presented with the opportunity to make a huge sacrifice. Jesus is also challenging us to think, what is the sacrifice? What is the cross we are called to bear today as Christ's disciples? I have 3 brief suggestions for stuff we might think about as we kind of get into the mindset of being ready to pick up our cross, not only in relation to big moments, but in relation to the day-to-day. Picking up our cross, I think, has to start with us, alongside Peter, thinking differently about how God's power works. I have a favorite comic strip cartoon that I have framed in my office. It's Far Side cartoon. It's a picture of God, who's a white male with long gray hair and a long beard and a long flowing robe, sitting in front of a computer monitor, looking intently at a picture of a man who's walking along the street with a piano dangling over his head. They're trying to hoist a piano into some apartment building, and he doesn't know the piano's hanging there. But in this comic strip, God's looking at this man, and God's finger is poised over a button that says, "Smite." And somehow, too often, even though we wouldn't exactly say that's how God's power works, somewhere in the background of our minds, I think we think of God's power as being mechanical. So God is, up there in the sky or somewhere. God is watching us. God is watching us. God is watching us from a distance, I guess, looking at the computer monitor, hitting the smite button, or maybe, for those of us who would be in church at 11:30 on a Sunday morning, for example, God would hit the save button. It's close. It's right next to the smite button, so you have to watch your step. But if we do things right, God's finger moves over to the save button, save, 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 instead of smite, smite, smite. The cross messes with anything close to that conception of how God's power operates. God is not causing things to happen, stopping things to happen from afar. What that cross is about is that God's power empties itself into life with us and becomes, it says in Philippians, obedient even unto death. Christ himself models a different understanding of power. Now, Christ isn't a doormat. Christ doesn't say, yeah, whatever, right? I mean, look at I love the Garden of Gethsemane scene. It really helps. As Jesus is saying, I don't want to do that, but I'll do what it takes to be with those people. Even if they kill me, I'm not letting go of them. I don't like it, but I'll do what it takes. And then Jesus on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He says. He calls it as it is. The disciples have left him. The Father isn't even present to him. Jesus' experience on that cross. Christ enters even into our doubt, even into our despair, in order to be with us, so that even when we're doubting, even when we're despairing, even when we're crying out, we are not alone. God has entered even into the places where God is not. I don't understand that, but it sounds really good, and it's true. Isn't that something about what we believe? Yeah. So too, we need to think differently about God's power. Again, last example from my Laotian students, somewhere along the line they were talking one day about different guards that they got to know when they were in prison. And it reminded me so much, this ministry they had to the prison guards that they befriended, and the empathy, the sympathy they had for these guards and the position the guards were placed in. It reminded me so much of what Jesus says. One of the things Jesus says as he's dying, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Contrary to the Mel Gibson movie, the cross isn't about beating out those who were his crucifiers, but about redeeming even them, entering into existence even with them. How does that impact the way we live? Got to have an impact. Something to think about. Second, picking up our cross today means hoping so hard it hurts. Picking up our cross today means continuing to hope against hope. Scripture uses that phrase for Abraham and Sarah. They're old, they don't have kids. God keeps promising they're going to be the mother and father of generations and generations, as many as the stars in the sky. And they keep hoping against hope. How is that a cross? That sounds more upbeat, more positive. Yay, hope. Hope is good. Well, here's where the cross is. When we really walk around hoping for the things God has promised, we will simultaneously walk around with a lot of disappointment because we're not there yet, right? I mean, you realize what God has promised us. Lions and lambs lying down together, God's kingdom coming to earth as it is in heaven, every tear being wiped away from every eye, no more senseless vows. These are things we are called to hope hard for. And to be people of hope then means we carry the burden of grief when we don't see that hope come to fruition. See if I can bring this home. Is in popular culture, a common expression is, you should keep your expectations low, right? Have you ever heard that? Keep your expectations low and then you won't be disappointed. I think one shape that carrying the cross takes for us is that we are called as disciples of Jesus Christ to keep our expectations and our hopes sky high. I mean, for goodness sakes, this is what the Lord's Prayer is about, right? Thy kingdom come, right? Thy kingdom, nothing less than that. That is how we bear witness to the world, keeping our hopes high, keeping our expectations high, but that entails a lot of disappointment along the way. You know why? Because when we read the newspaper, some of these horrific stories, if we hope, then we're not authorized to shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, that's just the way the world is. God never promised us a Disneyland. That'd be kind of easy. You could just muddle your way through as a kind of Eeyore character. You know Eeyore in Winnie the Pooh? Oh, well, I wasn't expecting it anyway, right? That Eeyore? That's not carrying the cross. The cross is to say, in the face of what shouldn't be, in the face of injustice, in the face of violence, it's to say, no, this is not it, right? It's to stomp our feet again and say, come on, thy kingdom come already, and to follow up immediately, by the way, with the next line of the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done. Being people of hope keeps us going. We keep hoping, we're going to get in there, and we're going to be vehicles through which God makes it happen. And third and finally, picking up the cross today means standing in solidarity with the world that God so loves, as it says in John 3:16. God so loves the world. So we're to understand power differently than that Far Side cartoon or any modified version of it. We're to hope so hard it hurts. And third, we're to stand in solidarity with those whom God so loves, the world that God so loves. And this is also, all of these are, cross is challenging. What can I say? This isn't easy stuff. How are we supposed to stand in solidarity with the world? The Apostle Paul, in all of his letters, he writes things like, weep with those who weep, or bear with one another's burdens. And I want to say to him, hey, Paul, you lived in the days before CNN. You lived in the days before 24/7 streaming news came onto an iPhone. Paul didn't know every single horrible thing that was happening all over the globe. He had a smaller community to have to weep with than we do. We can get apathetic as a form of survival with everything that's sort of coming after us. So part of picking up our crosses is figuring out how not to let that happen. Not to be apathetic, not to be shoulder shruggers. It's a hard word to say, shoulder shruggers. But to love deeply, maintain our hope, think differently about power. What is the cross we're called to pick up today? What do we have to lose and what do we have to gain? One more story as I come to an end. A man named Alan Bozak came to Austin Seminary a couple of years ago as a speaker. So Austin is where I teach. And I went to his lecture. Now, Alan Bozak worked with Nelson Mandela to fight apartheid in South Africa. And he is a Reformed theologian like I am, meaning that he is in the tradition of Presbyterians. So a lot of interest in this man. I go to his lecture, and as you might imagine, he tells incredible stories in his lecture about power, right? Different understandings of power, about hope, and about solidarity, standing in solidarity, all the things I've been talking about. And then he told a story that really surprised and actually upset me. He told a story about how there was a moment in history when God gave him something to do. God tried to hand him a cross that he was called to bear. And Bozak didn't take it. And he didn't take it because he talked himself out of it. He said, this isn't the right moment. Politically, there's going to be high cost. I've got to kind of work with the powers that be. We could, all of us maybe imagine and say, oh yeah, you did the right thing. You don't want to be too extreme, right? To Bozak, you don't want to be too extreme. You got to kind of work with the authorities. Just like Peter kind of wanted Jesus to work more with the organizing authorities. So Bozak tells this story. And by the way, this story was about reuniting the Dutch Reformed Church. There was a moment where they could have made a move that would have united the Dutch Reformed Church, and they didn't make the move politically. And Bozak said, that was an opportunity that is lost. It will never come back in my lifetime, and probably not in the lifetime of my children. Because we did not act, our church will be divided for a couple more generations at least. And so it bothered me so much, I went to him after the lecture. I said, Dr. Bozak, did you really mean that? It was a brilliant question on my part. Did you really mean what you said? And he said to me, yeah, I meant it. And then he said, very kindly, I promise you, very kindly, but prophetically, he said, Cindy, the problem with American Christians is we think that the opportunities are always going to be there and that we can go after them kind of at our leisure when we're ready for them. He said, it's true in your country. There are incredible opportunities. We're a land of opportunities, United States of America. He said, but this isn't how things work when it comes to picking up our crosses. There's a sense of urgency about that. When Jesus gives his lecture to the disciples in the text we read this morning, he doesn't say to them, okay, you're going to need to pick up your cross and follow me at some point. So kind of gear up for it and be ready. Or he didn't say, I need your answer a week from Thursday. He didn't even say, take some time out to consider it. wants them to do it now, wants them to be ready. It scares me a little bit to think of the opportunities that I've missed in my life to be a vehicle of change, because I'm trying to, weigh everything. And I don't know an easy solution to this because, we do have to weigh things, don't we? And we do have to think of the politics of things. But I'm throwing out what I learned from Bozak is there's another strand in the mix. And that's all I'm leaving you with on this today, because I don't know how to go any further. I'm working it through myself. And it's that we can't assume that opportunity is just right there standing, waiting for us when we're ready. See? We need to develop discernment. When do we have to act right away? When do we have to take that risk right away? And how do we make that decision? What sense, finally, can we make then of this moment, today, this moment here, of discipleship? What are we being called to do right now? I think one way to respond to Bozak is to develop a sensitivity every day. What is it we're called to do now? What is it? What's there? What are we missing? What are we called to do? What action are we called to take? What cross are we called to pick up? It's right now, today, that Jesus, our Messiah, asks us to join him in doing power differently, in hoping against hope, and in holding nothing back for the sake of those whom God so loves. It's not that the moment might come, or even is definitely coming at some point or another. The moment is here. It is here in some particular way. We need to ascertain. Will we let it pass by, or will we respond? Will we go with Jesus, or will he rebuke us? We who are the rocks, we who are among his beloved. Will we join in what God is doing in the world, or will we cling so fiercely to the understandings we've cobbled together for ourselves that we don't even see the cross we're supposed to carry? Could it be that we even might get in the way of what God is up to in the world? God forbid. The cross we're called to pick up today challenges power, calls us to hope until it hurts, and insists that we love ever new and ever more deeply. What we have to lose are lives that seem safe, lives that perpetuate the best of what already is, lives that gain the whole world as we know it. What we have to gain are lives that participate in a world that is new, in the world God promises, in a world that is wide and free, in a world where everyone is included and all tears are wiped away. May God give us the grace to lose the lives of our own making and find our lives in Christ. And let the people of God say, amen.